Greetings, everyone. It is GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. And we are going to start our sixth chapter of The Well of Eternity, which is the first book in the War of the Ancients trilogy. So why don't you stay a while and listen? On our last episode, a couple of the orcs that we have kind of loosely talked about on the side, they got pulled through time as well, and we saw what happened to our two main characters, really, Ronan and Croesus, as they landed. It seems like their magic is acting erratically, and some night elves sent by Xavius, who at this point is still a night elf, I'm imagining, have kind of captured them. So now they're in the clutches of Xavius and, by extension, Azara's forces. So let's see what happens here in Chapter 6. It was a troubled Malfurion who returned to his home near the Roaring Falls just beyond the large night elven settlement of Suramar. He had chosen the site because of the tranquility and untransformed nature around the falls. Nowhere else did he feel so at peace, save perhaps in Cenarius' hidden grove. A low-set, rounded domicile formed from both tree and earth, Malfurion's simple home was a far contrast from those of most night elves. Not for him was the gaudy array of colors that bespoke of his kind's tendency to try to outshine one another. The colors of his home were those of earth and life, the forest greens, the rich fertile browns, and kindred shades. He tried to adapt his surroundings, not force them to adapt to him, as was his people's way. Yet nothing about his home gave Malfurion any sense of comfort this night. Still fiercely clear in his mind were the thoughts and images he had experienced while walking the Emerald Dream. They had opened up doors in his imagination he wished desperately to shut again, but knew would be impossible.
The visions you see in the Eternal Dream, they can mean many things,
Cenarius had insisted.
no matter how true they might look. Even what we think is real, such as your view of Zinajari, may not be so, for the Dreamland plays its own games on our limited minds.
Malfurion knew that the demigod had only been trying to assuage him, that what the night elf saw had been truth. He understood that Cenarius was actually as concerned about the reckless spellcasting taking place in the palace of Azara as his student was. The power that the Highborn had been summoning, what could it be for? Did they not sense how stressed the fabric of the world had grown near the well? It was still unfathomable to him that the Queen could condone such careless and possibly destructive work, and yet Malfurion could not shake the certainty that she was as much a part of it as any of her subordinates. Azara was no simple figurehead. She truly ruled, and even when it came to her arrogant highborn. He tried to return to his normal routine, hoping that would help him forget his troubles. There were but 3 rooms to the young night elf's home, yet another example of the simplicity of his life compared to that of others. In one stood his bed and the handful of books and scrolls he had gathered concerning nature and his recent studies. In another toward the back was the larder and a small plain table where he prepared his meals. Malfurion considered both rooms nothing more than necessities. The third, the communal room, was ever his favored place. Here, where the light of the moon shone bright at night and the glistening waters of the falls could be seen, he sat in the center and meditated. Here, with a sip of the honey nectar wine so favored by his kind, he looked over his work and tried to comprehend what Cenarius had taught him the lesson before. Here, by the short ivory table where a meal could be spread out, he also visited with Tyrande and Illidan. Okay, pause. No toilet, no bathroom. Just never has to poop, or do they all just do it in the woods there? But if you walk around some of the lands of Suramar and the Dalaran and stuff like, not Dalaran, Darnassus, it checks, it tracks. There's no toilets there. But there would be no Tyrande or Illidan this evening. Tyrande had returned to the Temple of Elune to continue her own studies, and Malfurion's twin, in what was another sign of their growing dissimilarities, now preferred the raucousness of Suramar to the serenity of the forest. Malfurion leaned back, his face agleam in the light of the moon. He shut his eyes to think, hoping to calm his nerves. No sooner had he done so, though, when something large moved across the field of moonlight, briefly putting Malfurion in total darkness. The night elf's eyes snapped open just in time to catch a glimpse of a huge, ominous form. Malfurion immediately leapt to the door and flung it open, but to his surprise, only the rushing waters of the nearby falls met his tense gaze. He stepped outside, peered around. Surely no creature so large could move so fast. The bullish Tauren and ursine furbolgs were not unknown to him, but while they matched in size the peculiar shadow, neither of the two races was known for swiftness. A few branches rustled in the wind, and a night bird sang somewhere in the distance, but Malfurion could find no sign of his supposed intruder. Simply your own nerves, he finally chided himself, your own uncertainties. Returning inside, Malfurion seated himself again, his mind already caught up once more in his troubles. Unlike his phantom intruder, he was certain that he had not imagined or misread anything concerning the palace and the well. Somehow Malfurion would have to learn more than the Emerald Dream could at present reveal to him, and he suspected he would have to do it very, very quickly. He had almost been caught. Like an infant barely able to walk, he had almost lumbered right into the creature's lair. Hardly a worthy display of the well-honed skills for which a veteran orc warrior was known. Brox had not worried about his ability to defend himself had the creature caught him, but now was not the time to give in to his own desire to meet a glorious finish. Besides, from what he had seen of the lone figure, it would hardly have been a good match. Tall but too spindly, too unprotected. Humans were much more interesting and worthy opponents. Not for the first time his head throbbed. Brox put a hand to his temple, fighting the pain. A swirling confusion reigned in his mind. What had happened to him in the past several hours, the orc still could not say with complete certainty. Instead of being ripped apart like Gascal as he had expected, he was catapulted into madness. Things beyond the comprehension of a simple warrior had materialized and vanished before his eyes, and Brox recalled flying around in a swirl of chaotic forces, all while countless voices and sounds had assailed him, almost to the point of deafness. In the end, it had all proven too much. Brox had blacked out, certain he would never awake. He had, of course, but it was not to find himself safely back in the mountains or still trapped in the insanity. Instead, Brox discovered himself in an almost tranquil landscape consisting of tall trees and bucolic rolling hills for as far as the eye could see. The sun was setting, and the only sounds of life were the musical calls of birds. Even had he been dropped into the midst of a horrendous battle rather than this quiet scene, Brox could have done nothing but lay where he was. It had taken the orc more than an hour to recover enough to just stand, much less travel. Fortunately, during that anxious waiting time, Brox had discovered one miracle. His axe, which he thought lost, had been swallowed with him and deposited but a few yards from the orc. Not yet able to use his legs, Brox dragged himself to the weapon. He had not been able to wield it, but clutching its handle had given him some comfort while he waited for his strength to return. The moment he was able to walk, Brox had quickly pushed on. It did not pay to stay in one place when in a strange land, no matter how peaceful it looked. Situations always changed, even in the most peaceful places, and in his experience, generally not for the better. The orc tried to understand what had happened to him. He had heard of wizards traveling by means of special spells from one location to another, but if this was such a spell, then the mage who had cast it surely had to be insane. Either that or the incantation had gone awry, certainly a possibility. Alone and lost, Brox's instincts took over. No matter what had happened so far, Thrall would want him to find out more about the inhabitants of this place and what their intentions might be. If they were responsible by accident or design for reaching out with magic to the orc's new homeland, they posed a possible threat. Brox could die later. His first duty was to protect his people. At least now he had some notion as to what race lived here. Brox had never seen or heard of a night elf before the war against the Burning Legion, but he could never forget their unique looks. Somehow he had landed in some realm ruled by their kind, which at least opened to him the hope of returning home once he gathered what information he could. The Night Elves had fought alongside the orcs in Kalimdor. Surely that meant that Brox had merely ended up on some obscure part of the continent. With a little reconnaissance, he was certain that he would be able to figure out which direction the orc lands were and head to them. Brox had no intention of simply going up to one of the Night Elves and asking the way. Even if these were the same creatures who had allied themselves with the orcs and humans, he could not be certain that those of this land would be friendlier to an intruder now. Until he knew more, the wary orc intended to remain well out of sight. Although Brox did not immediately encounter any more such dwellings, he did note a glow in the distance that likely originated from some larger settlement. After a moment's consideration, the orc hefted his weapon and pushed on toward it. Barely had he made that decision, however, when shadows suddenly approached from the opposite direction. Pressing flat against a wide tree, Brox watched a pair of riders approach. His eyes narrowed in surprise when instead of good horses, he saw that they raced along on swift, gigantic panthers. The orc gritted his teeth and readied himself in case either the riders or their beasts sensed him. But the armored figures hurried past as if determined to be somewhere quickly. They appeared quite comfortable traveling in little light, which made the orc suddenly recall that night elves could see in darkness as well as he could see in day. That did not bode well. Orcs had fair night vision, but not nearly as good as that of the night elves. He hefted his axe. Perhaps he did not have the advantage in terms of sight, but Brox would match himself against any of the scrawny figures he had so far come across. Day or night, an axe in the hands of an orc warrior skilled in its use would make the same deep, fatal cut. Even the elaborate armor he noted on the riders would not long stand up to his beloved weapon. With the riders out of view, Brox continued on cautiously. He needed to find out more about these particular night elves, and the only way to do that was to spy on their settlement. There he might find out enough to know where in relation to home he now wandered. Then he could return to Thrall. Thrall would know what to make of all this. Thrall would deal with these night elves who dabbled in dangerous magic. So very, very simple. He blinked, so caught up in his thoughts that he only now saw standing before him the tall female figure clad in silver moonlit robes. She looked as startled as the orc felt. Then her mouth opened and the night elf cried out. Brox started to reach for her, his only intention that of smothering the scream, but before he could do anything, other cries arose, and night elves began appearing from every direction. A part of him desired to stand where he was and fight to the death, but the other part, that which served Thrall, reminded him that this would achieve nothing. He would have failed in his mission, failed his people. With a snarl of outrage, he turned and fled back in the direction he had come. Yet now it seemed that from every huge tree trunk, from every rising mound, figures popped into sight, and each let out the alarm at the sight of the burly orc. Horns blared. Brox swore, knowing what such a sound presaged. Sure enough, moments later, he heard feline growls and determined shouts. Glancing over his shoulder, he saw his pursuers nearing. Unlike the pair he had hidden from earlier, most of the new riders were clad only in robes and breastplates, but that hardly erased them as a threat. Each was not only armed, but their mounts presented an even more dire danger. One swipe of a paw would slice the orc open. One bite of the saber-toothed jaws would rip off his head. Brox wanted to take his axe and sweep across their ranks, chopping away at rider and mount alike and leaving a trail of blood and maimed bodies behind him, yet, despite his desire to lay waste to those who threatened him, Thrall's teachings and commands held such violence in check. Brox growled and met the first riders with the flat of his axe head. He knocked one night elf from his mount, then after dodging the cat's claws, turned to seize another rider by the leg. The orc threw the second night elf atop the first, knocking the air out of both. A blade whistled by his head. Brox easily smashed this slim blade to fragments with his powerful axe. The night elf wisely retreated, the stump of his weapon still gripped tightly. The orc took advantage of the gap created by the retreat to slip past his pursuers. Some of the night elves did not look at all eager to follow, which raised Brox's spirits. More than his own honor, Thrall's pride in his chosen warrior continued to keep Brox from turning and making a foolish last stand. He would not let his chief down. But just as escape looked possible, another night elf materialized before him, this one dressed in shimmering robes of brilliant green, with gold and ruby starbursts dotting the chest. A cowl obscured most of the night elf's long, narrow visage, but he seemed undaunted by the huge, brutish orc coming up on him. Brox waved his axe and shouted, trying to scare off the night elf. The hooded figure raised one hand to chest level, the index and middle fingers pointed toward the moonlit sky. The orc recognized a spell being cast, but by that time it was already too late. To his astonishment, a circular sliver of the moon fell from the sky, falling upon Brox like a soft, misty blanket. As it enshrouded him, the orc's arms grew heavy and his legs weak. He had to fight to keep his eyelids open. The axe slipping from his limp grasp, Brox fell to his knees. Through the silvery haze, he now saw other similarly clad figures encircling him. The hooded form stood patiently, obviously watching the spell's work. A sense of fury ignited Brox. With a low snarl, he managed to push himself up to his feet. This was not the glorious death he had wanted. The night elves intended that he fall at their feet like a helpless infant. He would not do it. Fumbling fingers managed to seize the axe again. To his pleasure, he noted some of the hooded figures start. They had not expected such resistance. But as he tried to raise his weapon, a second silvery veil settled over him. What strength Brox had summoned vanished again. When the axe fell this time, he knew he would be unable to retrieve it. The orc took one wobbly step, then fell forward. Even then, Brox tried to crawl toward his foes, determined not to make their victory an easy one. A third veil dropped over him, and Brox blacked out. 3 nights. 3 nights, and still nothing to show for our efforts. Xavius was not pleased. 3 of the highborn sorcerers stepped back from the continual spell work. They were immediately replaced by those who had managed to replenish their strength with some overdue rest. Xavius's false black eyes turned to the 3 who had just finished. One of them noticed the dark orbs gazing their direction and cringed. The highborn might be the most glorious of the queen's servants, but Lord Xavius was the most glorious and dangerous of the highborn. Tomorrow night we shall increase the field of power tenfold, he declared, the crimson streaks in his eyes flaring. Unable to meet his gaze, one of the other highborn nonetheless dared say, "With all due respect, my Lord Xavius, that risks much. Such an additional increase may destabilize all we have already accomplished." "And what is that, Peralthon?" Xavius loomed over the other robed figures, his shadow seeming to move of its own accord in the mad light of the spell.
What have we accomplished? Why, we command more power than any night elf has ever commanded before.
Xavius nodded, then frowned.
Yes, and with it we can squash an insect with a mountain-sized hammer. You are a short-sighted fool, Perothon. Consider yourself fortunate that your skill is demanded for this effort.
Clamping his mouth shut, the other night elf bowed his head gratefully. The Queen's counselor looked with disdain upon the rest of the highborn.
What we seek to do, we need perfect manipulation of the well to accomplish. We must have the ability to slay the insect without its even realizing the death until after the fact. We must have such precision, such a fine touch that there will be no question as to the perfect execution of our final goal.
Preaching again, my darling Xavius. The melodic voice would have enchanted any of the other highborn into killing themselves if it would please the speaker, but not so the onyx-eyed Xavius. With a careless gesture, he dismissed the weary spellcasters, then turned to the one person in the palace who did not rightly show him the respect he deserved. She glittered as she entered, a vision of perfection that his magical orbs amplified. She was the glory of the night elves, their beloved mistress. When she breathed, she made the crowds breathless. When she touched the cheek of a favored warrior, he went out and willingly fought dragons and more, even if it meant his certain destruction. The queen of the night elves was tall for a female, taller even than many males. Only Xavius truly towered above her. Yet despite her height, she moved like the wind, silent grace with every step. No cat walked as silently as Azara, and none walked with as much confidence. Her deep violet skin was as smooth as the almost sheer silk garment she wore. Her hair, long, thick, lush, and moonlight silver, cascaded down around her shoulders and artfully curved backside. In contrast to her previous visit, when she had matched her garments to her eyes, she now wore a flowing gown, the same wondrous color as her luxurious hair. Even Xavius secretly desired her, but on his own terms. His ambitions drove him far more than her wiles ever could. Still he found much use in her presence, just as he knew she found the same in his. They shared an ultimate objective, but with differing rewards for each waiting at the end. When that goal was finally reached, Xavius would show Azara who truly ruled.
Light of the moon, he began, expression obedient. I preach only of your purity, your flawlessness. These others I simply remind of their duty, nay, of their love for you. They should not therefore wish to fail.
For they would be failing you as well, my darling counselor. Behind the stunning queen, two handmaidens carried the train of her long translucent gown. They shifted the train to the side as Azara seated herself on the special chair she had made the highborn erect so that she could watch their efforts in comfort. And I think they fear that more than they love me.
Hardly, my mistress.
The queen positioned herself to gaze upon the struggling spellcasters, her gown shifting to best display her perfect form. Xavius remained unmoved by her maneuver. He would have her and whatever else he desired after they had succeeded in their great mission. A sudden flash of blazing light drew the eyes of both to the work of the sorcerers. Hovering in the center of the circle created by the highborn, a furious ball of energy continually remade itself. Its myriad displays had a hypnotic effect, in great part because they often seemed to be opening up a doorway into elsewhere. Xavius especially spent long hours staring into the night elf's creations, seeing with his artificial eyes what none of the others could. Watching now, the counselor wrinkled his brow. He squinted, studying the endless depths within. For just the briefest of moments he could have sworn that he had seen. I believe you are not listening to me, darling Xavius. Is that at all possible? He managed to recover.
As possible as living without breathing, daughter of the moon. But I admit I was distracted enough that I may not have understood clearly. You said again something about...
A brief throaty chuckle escaped Queen Azara, but she did not contradict him.
What is there to understand? I simply restated that surely we must soon triumph. Soon we shall have the power and ability to cleanse our land of its imperfections, create of it the perfect paradise. So shall it be, my queen, so shall it be. We are but a short time from the creation of a grand golden age. The realm, your realm, will be purified. The world will know everlasting glory.
Xavius allowed himself a slight smile.
and the blighted, impure races that in the past have prevented such a perfect age from issuing forth will cease to be.
Ajara rewarded his good words with a pleased smile of her own, then said, I am glad to hear you say it will be soon. I have more supplicants today, Lord Counsellor. They came in fear of the violence in and around the great well. They asked me for guidance as to its cause and danger. Naturally, I referred their requests to you.
As you rightly should have, mistress. I will assure their fear is long enough for our precious task to come to fruition. After that, it will be your pleasure to announce what has been done for the good of your people.
And they shall love me the more for it. Ajara murmured, her eyes narrowed, as if imagining the grateful crowds.
If they could possibly love you any more than they do already, my glorious queen.
Ajara accepted his compliment with a momentary lowering of her slitted eyes, then, with a smooth grace of which only she was capable, rose from the chair. Her attendants quickly manipulated the train of her gown so that it would not in the slightest hamper her movements. I will make the wondrous announcement soon, Lord Xavius, she declared, turning away from the counselor. See to it that all is ready when I do.
It will consume my waking hours, he replied, bowing to her retreating form, and be the dreams of my slumber.
But the moment she and her attendants had departed, a deep frown crossed the counselor's cold visage. He signaled to one of the stone-faced guards ever standing duty at the entrance to the chamber.
If I am not alerted before the next time Her Majesty decides to join us, it will be your head. Is that understood?
Yes, my lord, the guard returned, expression never wavering.
I also expect to be notified of Captain Verothen's arrival before Her Majesty. His task is nothing with which to sully her hands. Make certain that the captain and whatever he brings with him is led directly to me.
Yes, my lord. Dismissing the guard, Xavius returned to the task of overseeing the highborn spell work. A lattice of dancing magical energy now enshrouded the fiery sphere, which continued to remake itself. As Xavius watched, the sphere folded within, almost as if it attempted to devour itself.
Fascinating,
he whispered. This close, the Lord Counsellor could feel the intense emanations, the barely bound forces summoned up from the source of all the Night Elves' magical might. It had been Xavius who had first suspected that his kind had only so far skimmed the surface of the dark water's potential. The Well of Eternity was aptly named, for the more he studied it, the more he realized that its bounty was endless. The physical dimensions of the well were only a trick of the limited mind. The true well existed in 1,000 dimensions, 1,000 places simultaneously, and from every aspect of it, every variation of it, the Highborn would learn to draw whatever they pleased. The potential staggered even him. Energies and colors unseen even by the others danced and fought before Xavius's magical eyes. They drew him in, their elemental power seductive. The Lord Counsellor drank in the fantastic sight before him, but from within, from deep beyond the physical world, he suddenly felt something stare back. This time the Night Elf knew he was not mistaken. Xavius sensed a presence, a distant presence. Yet despite that incredible distance, the might he also sensed was staggering. He tried to pull back, but it was already too late. Deep, so very deep within the captured energies of the well, the mind of the counselor was suddenly dragged beyond the edge of reality, beyond eternity, until,
I have searched long for you,
came the voice. It was life, death, creation, destruction, and power infinite. Had he even desired to do so, Xavius would have been unable to wrench his eyes away from the abyss within. Other eyes now snared his tightly, the eyes of the Lord Counsellor's new God.
Now you have come to me.
The waters bubbled as if boiling. Great waves rose and crashed down time and time again. Lightning flashed from both the heavens and the dark well. Then came the whispers. The first of the Night Elves to hear them thought the sounds only the wild wind. They soon ignored them completely, more concerned with the possible devastation of their elegant homes. A few more astute, more attuned to the well's unearthly energies heard them for what they were. Voices from the well itself. But what the voices said, even the majority of those could not say. It was the one or two who heard the voices who truly feared, and yet did not speak of their fear to others, lest they be branded mad and cast out from their society. Thus they failed to heed the only warning they would truly get. The voices spoke of nothing but hunger. They hungered for everything. Life, energy, souls. They wanted through to the world, through to the Night Elves' pristine realm. And once there, they would devour it. All right, another chapter down. I think we're probably about a quarter of the way through the book, and in this one, it seems like we've now seen what happens when everybody lands, and we've also got our next kind of insight into um, the kind of the evil in this land, both what will become the kind of minor evil players, Xavius and Lord and Queen Ajara, and the Burning Crusade leader. I don't know why I always forget his name, but they will be not Illidan. I keep wanting to say Illidan, but that's what's his name. Anyway, that leader, evil demon lord, the Burning Crusade. So they'll be coming through soon. All right, so not too bad of an episode. Interesting. It was cool to see the orcs fight, although I don't know why, but as of right now, I'm a little bit less interested in the orc party. I didn't realize the second orc died. I wonder if he did actually live or if he got ripped apart. Anything else? Anything else? All right, nope. I think this is another wrap, another episode in the pipe 5x5. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Thanks as always for listening, and see ya.